when celebrities went rogue on Johnny Carson, America's most beloved late-night host, sitting behind his desk with that famous smile frozen on his face, but his eyes, they're screaming for help. The guest beside him has just crossed a line that 30 years of broadcasting experience never prepared him for, and 70 million Americans are watching it all unfold in real time. What you're about to witness isn't your typical celebrity blooper reel. This is something far more fascinating. For 3 decades, Johnny Carson ruled late-night television with an iron fist wrapped in velvet. His show was a well-oiled machine where every laugh was calculated, every pause perfectly timed, and every celebrity knew exactly where the boundaries were. But here's the thing about boundaries. They only matter when people respect them. Tonight, we're diving deep into 7 moments that shattered Carson's carefully constructed world. These weren't minor slip-ups or awkward pauses. These were full-blown disasters that left America's most unflappable host visibly rattled, scrambling for control, and in some cases, questioning whether he should ever invite these people back again. What makes these meltdowns absolutely riveting isn't just watching famous people implode on national television. It's watching Johnny Carson, the master conductor of late-night television, realize that his orchestra has gone completely off script and there's nothing he can do to stop it. The forced smile that doesn't quite hide the panic, the desperate glances toward his sidekick, Ed McMahon, the white-knuckle grip on his pen as he tries and fails to steer the conversation back to safe territory. From pop stars who turned promotional appearances into provocative spectacles, to comedy legends who forgot where the line was drawn, to literary icons whose demons took center stage, these 7 guests didn't just push Carson's buttons, they smashed them with a sledgehammer while America watched in shocked fascination. So grab your popcorn, because we're about to witness television history at its most uncomfortably authentic.
Number 1. Redd Foxx, the shortest Tonight Show appearance ever. Redd Foxx was already a television icon thanks to Sanford and Son when he appeared on The Tonight Show in 1975. What should have been a standard promotional interview instead became the briefest and most talked about guest spot in the show's history. Total time on camera? Less than 2 minutes. Here's how it went down. Foxx was a heavy smoker, the kind who lit up almost constantly off camera. In earlier years of television, smoking on set was common, even expected. But by 1975, NBC had implemented stricter policies: no smoking on camera, clean image for the network. Apparently, nobody told Foxx, or if they did, he didn't take it seriously. The moment Foxx sat down after the initial pleasantries, he asked if he could smoke. Carson, following network policy, politely explained that smoking wasn't permitted on set, and that's when everything fell apart. Fox's entire demeanor changed in an instant. Carson thought he was joking. Comedians often joked about various restrictions, so he laughed lightly and tried to continue the interview. But Foxx wasn't joking. He was deadly serious. What happened next shocked everyone. Foxx stood up, declared something along the lines of, "Then I can't do this," and walked off stage, just walked away, left Carson sitting there alone with an expression that mixed surprise, confusion, and the dawning realization that this wasn't a comedy bit. This was an actual walkout on live television. The speed of the escalation was breathtaking. One moment, normal Tonight Show interview. Next moment, an empty chair and Johnny Carson sitting alone, trying to process what just happened. There was no build-up, no warning signs, no tense back and forth, just 0 to nuclear in seconds flat. Carson, being the ultimate professional, recovered quickly with a quip about Fox's quick exit before moving on to the next segment, but you could see he was stunned. Carson had dealt with difficult guests, drunk guests, and belligerent guests, but a guest who walked off over a smoking policy? That was new. Backstage, according to staff accounts, the reaction was a mixture of shock and confusion. What just happened? Did that really just happen? Carson rarely took such incidents personally, but the abruptness and public nature of Fox's departure represented a unique challenge to his authority as host. It was a reminder that despite all his experience and skill, he couldn't control everything. The fallout was swift. Fox's representatives quickly reached out to Carson's team to smooth things over, explaining that the comedian had misunderstood the policy and reacted impulsively. Carson publicly took the high road, making light of the incident rather than criticizing Fox, but the damage was done. Their professional relationship never fully recovered. Fox eventually returned to the show years later, but there was always a certain tension in subsequent appearances. Both men remembered that moment of public rupture, and it created a forced politeness that never matched Carson's easy rapport with his favorite guests. The incident became part of Tonight Show legend, an example of how quickly television's carefully constructed environment can collapse when a simple misunderstanding collides with a strong personality and live television. It proved that in the world of live TV, you're always one impulsive decision away from creating a moment that will be discussed for decades.
Number 2. Buddy Hackett, when the comedian stopped being funny. Buddy Hackett was one of Carson's most reliable guests, a storyteller extraordinaire whose animated tales and infectious laugh had made him a Tonight Show favorite for years. His appearances followed a predictable, beloved pattern. Hackett would settle in, Carson would provide minimal prompting, and the comedian would launch into extended, hilarious anecdotes that left everyone in stitches. But on one memorable night in the mid-1970s, that pattern shattered completely. Hackett arrived seemingly troubled by off-camera concerns, and what began as his usual comedic storytelling took a dark, unexpected turn. Instead of his typical, funny, exaggerated tales about Hollywood, he veered into genuinely bitter territory. He started naming names, specific producers, specific executives, people he felt had wronged him. And it wasn't funny anger, it was real anger, personal and pointed. This violated the unspoken contract between Carson and his comedian guests. The deal was simple. Be entertaining, be funny, maybe gently roast Hollywood, but never use the platform for settling personal scores. Hackett was breaking that contract right there on live television, and everyone could feel it. The audience's reaction told the whole story. The consistent laughter that usually accompanied a Hackett appearance gave way to scattered, uncertain chuckles, then extended silences as the comedian's grievances became increasingly specific and personal. People didn't know whether to laugh, applaud, or just sit quietly until this uncomfortable moment passed. Carson tried everything in his toolkit. He asked about upcoming projects. Hackett circled back to his grievances. He tried lighthearted topics. Hackett returned to his list of backstabbers and phonies. He deployed his considerable charm. Hackett remained locked in this dark tangent. It was like watching someone use a comedy slot for therapy, raw and real, but completely at odds with the show's tone. What made this particularly uncomfortable was that this was Hackett, not some boundary-pushing newcomer or troubled star, but one of Carson's most trusted regulars. If even Hackett could go off the rails like this, it suggested that nobody was truly safe from having a bad night on live television. Carson's expression shifted from amusement to concern to visible discomfort as the segment progressed. You could see him calculating, is this a bit that's just going over poorly? Is Buddy genuinely troubled? How do I end this without making it worse? Finally, after multiple unsuccessful redirection attempts, Carson went to a commercial early, another rare tactical retreat. When they returned, he skillfully transitioned to another segment, effectively cutting Hackett's appearance short without explicitly saying, "We're ending this disaster right now." Backstage, according to staff accounts, Carson was more confused than angry. He was genuinely concerned about Hackett's well-being, while also frustrated that a usually reliable guest had so dramatically broken format. "Something's eating Buddy," Carson reportedly told his producer. "Let's check in on him before we book him again." Hackett did return to The Tonight Show in subsequent years, his usual humorous self apparently restored.
But that night remained in Tonight Show lore as a reminder that even the most established, comfortable relationships could unpredictably fracture when personal issues spilled into professional spaces. And sometimes, the funniest people are carrying the heaviest burdens.
Number 3. Shelley Winters, the actress who exploded. Academy Award winner Shelley Winters appeared on The Tonight Show many times over the years. Each appearance was unpredictable in its own way. She had a reputation for explosive energy and dominating conversations. But one particular night, she didn't just dominate the conversation, she detonated it. Winters arrived with what can only be described as grievances to air and zero filter to contain them. The interview started normally enough. Typical Carson banter, a few laughs, standard celebrity panel dynamics. But then another guest on the couch made a comment that Winters perceived as a slight, and that was all it took. What happened next was unprecedented. Winters didn't just get upset, she transformed the entire segment into something that belonged more in a street fight than on network television. She stood up, started pointing fingers, and created the kind of scene that simply didn't happen on Carson's meticulously controlled show. Her voice rose to a shout as she launched into a tirade that seemed to encompass not just the immediate perceived insult, but years of accumulated Hollywood resentments. She ranted about the treatment of aging actresses, about perceived injustices in the industry, about slights both real and imagined. It was like watching a pressure cooker finally explode after years of building steam. The audience reaction was telling. Stunned silence. People who came expecting Carson's usual gentle, sophisticated atmosphere instead found themselves witnessing something raw and uncomfortable. This wasn't entertainment. This was genuine anger spilling out onto a soundstage in front of 70 million viewers. And Carson? For once, his legendary composure cracked. You could see genuine annoyance flash across his face, a rare break in the unflappable demeanor he'd cultivated over decades. He tried his usual tactics, humor, subtle redirection, gentle intervention. Nothing worked. Winters was a hurricane that had made landfall, and there was no calming this storm. Carson had a tell when he was genuinely annoyed. He'd start shuffling papers on his desk, glancing at Ed McMahon with an expression that silently screamed for help. During Winters' meltdown, he was practically creating origami with his note cards. It was the equivalent of a captain waving distress signals from a sinking ship. After multiple failed attempts to regain control, Carson deployed his ultimate weapon, calling for a commercial break. This was the nuclear option, reserved for segments that had spiraled so far beyond control that there was no other choice. It was an admission of defeat, and Carson rarely admitted defeat. When they came back from the commercial, Winters had been somewhat calmed, but the atmosphere remained tense for the rest of the show. The damage was done. Behind the scenes, Carson reportedly told his producers to space out her next appearance. Carson speak for, let's give this some serious time to cool off. What's remarkable is that despite this and other unpredictable moments, Winters continued to be invited back eventually. It was a testament to both her star power and Carson's understanding that sometimes volcanic unpredictability makes for memorable television, even when it crosses every comfort boundary. But that particular night became legend, a reminder that even in Carson's carefully constructed world, human emotion can't always be controlled, contained, or directed. Sometimes it just explodes, and all you can do is wait for the dust to settle.
Number 4. Truman Capote, when genius crumbled on camera. When literary giant Truman Capote appeared on The Tonight Show in 1980, he carried with him both extraordinary talent and crushing personal demons. The author of In Cold Blood and Breakfast at Tiffany's was already deep into the substance abuse issues that would eventually contribute to his death. And on this particular night, those demons took center stage.
From the moment Capote settled into the guest chair, something was clearly wrong. His speech patterns were all over the place. His movements had that jerky, erratic quality that immediately signals impairment. And his train of thought? It was less of a train and more of a series of disconnected boxcars scattered across the tracks. Here's what made this particularly heartbreaking. Carson genuinely admired literary figures. He was an intellectual who loved showcasing writers, giving them a platform to display their brilliance to mainstream America. He wanted this interview to be a showcase for Capote's genius. Instead, it became an uncomfortable window into his decline. Carson tried valiantly to guide Capote toward coherent conversation. He lobbed softball questions about literature, about Capote's writing process, about his famous social observations. But Capote seemed determined to derail every single attempt. He'd start to answer a question, then veer off into tangents that made no logical sense, connecting dots that only he could see. What made this even more uncomfortable was Capote's determination to discuss provocative topics. He made strange, inappropriate comments about politics and sexuality that violated every unwritten rule of family-friendly television. Carson would try to redirect to safer territory, and Capote would circle right back to controversial subjects like a moth to a flame. The audience came expecting witty literary banter from one of America's most celebrated authors. What they got instead was something closer to watching a brilliant mind short-circuit in real time. Capote would occasionally produce flashes of his famous wit, these brief moments where you'd see the genius everyone knew, before descending back into incoherent rambling. Carson's patience during this segment was remarkable. With most guests in this condition, he would have found an excuse to end things early, but you could see him holding on to hope that Capote would suddenly snap into focus, that the brilliant conversationalist would emerge from this fog. That moment never came. The decision never to invite Capote back spoke volumes. Carson generally gave troubled guests second chances, believing in redemption and recovery. But this appearance clearly crossed a line. It wasn't just uncomfortable television, it was sad television, a public documentation of a legend's decline. What made this particularly poignant was the contrast with Capote's earlier appearances, where he dazzled audiences with razor-sharp observations and literary insights. For viewers familiar with his work, watching this disjointed, barely coherent version of Capote was heartbreaking. The disconnect between his brilliant prose and his incoherent television persona was stark and tragic. This segment stands as one of late-night television's most uncomfortable moments, not because it was shocking or offensive, but because it was genuinely sad. America watched a literary genius dissolve before their eyes, and there was nothing Carson or anyone else could do to stop it.
Number 5. Oliver Reed, the interview that became infamous. British actor Oliver Reed arrived at NBC's Burbank studios in 1975 with a mission: promote his film Royal Flash and make a good impression on American television. What actually happened became one of the most uncomfortable segments in Tonight Show history. The red flags appeared the instant Reed walked on stage. His gait wasn't quite steady. His eyes had that unfocused quality that tells you everything you need to know. And when he settled into the guest chair next to Carson, crew members later reported that the smell of alcohol was so overpowering they could detect it from several feet away. Carson, with his decades of experience, immediately recognized the situation. You could see it in his face, that quick assessment, that mental calculation of how bad is this going to be and how do I minimize the damage. He dealt with guests who'd had a drink or two before, but this was different. This was a guest who'd apparently had the entire bar. What followed was excruciating television. Carson tried to guide Reed through simple promotional questions about the film. Reed's responses? Incoherent rambling that careened from topic to topic with no logical connection.
He slurred his words, interrupted Carson repeatedly, and became increasingly hostile when the host tried to steer things back on track. But here's what made it particularly unsettling: Reed's mood swings. One moment he'd be attempting charm, the next he'd turn belligerent. He'd start telling a story that went absolutely nowhere, then suddenly pivot to challenging Carson with aggressive questions that shattered the show's conversational rhythm. It was like watching someone channel surf between different personalities, none of them appropriate for network television. Carson's skill at handling difficult situations was legendary, but even he had limits. You could watch him doing the mental math in real time. How long before a commercial break? Can this possibly be salvaged? If I end it now, do I make him look worse? There was no good option, and America could see him searching desperately for one. The audience's journey through this segment tells its own story. They started with laughter. Reed's eccentric behavior seemed funny at first, then nervous chuckles as it became uncomfortable. Finally, dead silence as everyone realized they weren't watching entertainment anymore. They were watching a man whose condition had crossed from amusing to genuinely concerning. Carson made the rare decision to cut the segment short. For a host who prided himself on never making guests look bad, this was the nuclear option. It was an admission that there was no saving this, no spinning it into something entertaining. The damage was done. For Reed, the consequences were devastating. He'd already been struggling to break into Hollywood, despite success in British films. After this appearance, his chances evaporated. Studios, already nervous about his reputation, now had video evidence of the risks involved in casting him. One disastrous interview on America's flagship talk show effectively ended his American career before it really began. The segment lives on as both an entertainment legend and a cautionary tale. It's a reminder that even the most controlled television environment can implode when a guest shows up fundamentally unable to meet basic standards of behavior. And it showed America something rare: Johnny Carson unable to save someone from themselves, no matter how hard he tried.
Number 6. Don Rickles, when friendship met live television chaos. Don Rickles and Johnny Carson had one of late night's greatest bromances. Rickles would come on the show, insult Carson mercilessly. Carson would laugh so hard he'd nearly fall out of his chair, and America would eat it up. They had chemistry, history, and a mutual understanding of where the lines were drawn. And then Rickles decided to redraw those lines without permission. It started innocently enough the night before. Rickles was doing his usual appearance, and during a commercial break, he sat in Carson's chair, something guests occasionally did for fun. But then he picked up Carson's cigarette box, this treasured NBC gift that had been on the desk for years, and somehow managed to break it. Oops. The next day, Rickles wasn't even scheduled to appear. He was across the lot filming his sitcom, CPO Sharky. Meanwhile, Carson was on air, showing the broken cigarette box to the audience, making playful jokes about Rickles' carelessness. It was classic Carson, turning a minor incident into entertainment gold. But then, something happened that shocked everyone, including Carson. Without warning, without invitation, without clearing it with anyone, Don Rickles burst onto the set in full Navy costume from his sitcom. He didn't just interrupt, he invaded. He seized control of the show like it was a hostile takeover. For several surreal minutes, America watched as Rickles, in character and completely off script, hijacked The Tonight Show. At first, it was funny. The surprise appearance, the costume, Rickles' rapid-fire wit, everyone was laughing. But then something shifted. You could see it in Carson's eyes, in the tightness around his smile. This wasn't just a playful bit anymore. Rickles wasn't following the usual pattern. He was genuinely taking over, grabbing the desk, shouting across the set, delivering insults that went beyond friendly roasting into territory that felt wrong. Here's what the cameras didn't show. Behind the scenes, Carson was legitimately angry. Not publicly angry.
He maintained his professional demeanor on camera, but internally furious. Staff members who were there that night talked about it for years afterward. This was a violation of something sacred to Carson, the show's format and professionalism. Think about what Rickles actually did. He showed up uninvited, in costume, during someone else's show and commandeered it for his own purposes. In any other context, this would be career suicide. But this was Rickles, Carson's friend, which made it both better and worse. Better because their relationship meant Carson couldn't publicly destroy him. Worse because the betrayal cut deeper. The segment became legendary precisely because it was so unprecedented. Is Carson losing control of his own show? To anyone? It was like watching Superman trip over his own cape. It just didn't happen. And the aftermath tells you everything. They remained friends. Carson wasn't petty, but insiders noticed a coolness that lasted for months. Rickles had crossed a line that even their friendship couldn't completely excuse. He'd forgotten that live television runs on trust, and that trust has boundaries that shouldn't be crossed, even by the people closest to you.
Number 7. Madonna, the material girl, gets too material. Let's set the scene. It's 1987, and Madonna is riding a wave of controversy that she's carefully crafted into a global brand. She's promoting her Who's That Girl tour, and Johnny Carson's producers are probably thinking they're getting a standard promotional interview. Maybe a little playful banter, some stories from the road, plug the tour. Everyone goes home happy. They could not have been more wrong. The moment Madonna stepped onto that stage, you could feel the temperature in the studio change. She wasn't wearing what you'd call traditional television attire. Think less talk show guest and more Victoria's Secret catalog meets rebellion. Black lace, fishnet stockings, and an attitude that announced she wasn't there to play by anyone's rules, especially not Johnny Carson's. Now, Carson had interviewed thousands of celebrities. He'd handled everyone from presidents to comedians to rock stars. He had a system, a rhythm, a way of making even the most eccentric personalities fit into his show's format. But Madonna, she didn't want to fit into anything. From the second she sat down on that famous couch, she flipped the script entirely. Instead of following Carson's gentle, sophisticated lead, she became the aggressor. She started flirting, and not in that cute, playful, late-night banter kind of way. This was aggressive, explicit, boundary-pushing flirtation that had Carson looking like a deer in headlights. The studio went dead silent at points. Not because people weren't entertained, some definitely were, but because they were witnessing something that just didn't happen on The Tonight Show. This was Carson's domain, his kingdom, his rules, and Madonna had just declared herself a revolutionary. Here's what makes this particularly brilliant from Madonna's perspective. She knew exactly what she was doing. Every suggestive comment, every religious reference that made network censors sweat, every deliberate push against 1980s television decorum, it was calculated. She was using Carson's platform while completely disregarding his format. This wasn't an accident. This was a strategic strike. Carson tried everything in his arsenal. He attempted his trademark subtle innuendo. Madonna responded with explicit commentary that wasn't subtle at all. He tried to redirect the conversation. She steamrolled right through those attempts. He deployed his famous charm. She matched it and raised the stakes to levels that made network executives reach for the delay button. And here's the kicker. During commercial breaks, while America couldn't see, Carson wasn't his usual composed self. He was annoyed, not furious. Carson rarely showed fury, but definitely thrown off his game. For someone who prided himself on controlling every aspect of his show, this was deeply unsettling. The audience reaction split perfectly down generational lines. Younger viewers thought it was revolutionary. Finally, someone challenging the establishment, pushing boundaries on mainstream television. Older viewers were scandalized. Who was this woman, and why wasn't Johnny putting her in her place? But here's the ultimate proof that Madonna crossed a line.
Despite releasing multiple albums and starring in several films over the next 5 years before Carson retired, she never sat on that couch again, not once. For one of the biggest pop stars of the era, that's significant. Carson quietly, professionally, without any public drama, made sure their paths didn't cross again. Madonna got exactly what she wanted, a provocative, boundary-pushing moment that fed her controversial image, and Carson got exactly what he didn't want, a guest who reminded him that sometimes, despite all his experience and control, chaos finds a way in.
The man behind the desk. These 7 explosive moments reveal something profound about Johnny Carson and the empire he built. For 3 decades, he created an environment where the impossible seemed effortless, where difficult interviews looked easy, where awkward moments became smooth transitions, where chaos was transformed into entertainment gold. His genius wasn't just being funny or charming, though he was both. It was his ability to make the incredibly difficult job of live television hosting look like a casual conversation. Behind that relaxed smile was a master craftsman orchestrating complex segments designed to showcase guests at their best while maintaining his show's consistent tone. When guests like Madonna, Rickles, or Foxx challenged that careful balance, whether through calculated provocation or impulsive boundary crossing, viewers witnessed something rare in Carson's world: genuine surprise. These moments stand out precisely because they were so uncommon in a show defined by smooth predictability. What's most revealing is Carson's response to these disasters. Unlike modern hosts who might lean into awkwardness for viral potential, Carson was a product of an earlier broadcasting era that prioritized professionalism above all. When confronted with genuinely difficult situations, his instinct was always to protect the guest, maintain the show's dignity, and restore order as quickly as possible. He viewed himself as the audience's advocate. If a guest was entertaining, he'd give them room to perform. If they crossed lines that made viewers uncomfortable, he'd step in, not to create more drama, but to diffuse it. That's the opposite of what most modern hosts would do. This protective instinct extended even to guests who'd legitimately disrupted his show. Carson rarely banned performers permanently. With few exceptions, most eventually received second chances, though often after longer cooling-off periods and more careful screening. In today's fragmented media landscape, where shocking celebrity behavior translates to valuable social media currency, Carson's approach seems almost quaint. He wasn't seeking viral moments or controversial clips. He was building an institution designed to comfort America before bedtime, night after night, year after year. The rare occasions when his carefully maintained facade cracked, when chaos broke through despite his best efforts, these moments stand out precisely because they were exceptions to his remarkable consistency. They represent the few instances when television's most controlled environment briefly surrendered to the unpredictability of human behavior. And maybe that's what makes these moments so endlessly fascinating. They showed us that even the greatest conductor can't control every musician in the orchestra. Sometimes someone goes off script, hits the wrong notes, and creates a moment of unintentional authenticity in a medium often defined by careful artifice. If you enjoyed this deep dive into television history's most uncomfortable moments, there's plenty more where that came from. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next exploration into the moments that made TV history, for better or worse. Drop a comment and let me know, which of these Carson disasters shocked you the most? Have you witnessed any modern talk show meltdowns that rival these classics? And what other Tonight Show moments should we cover next? And here's the thing. These stories remind us that sometimes the most memorable television happens when everything goes wrong. If you appreciate that kind of unscripted authenticity, you're gonna love what we have coming next. Thanks for watching, and remember, in the world of live television, you're always one impulsive decision away from becoming a legend. Make sure it's the good kind of legend. Until next time.